It all started with an unexpected invitation. Karoline Leavitt was in her office preparing for an upcoming town hall event when her phone buzzed. Her communications director, Mark, had a tone of urgency. "Caroline, you need to see this," he said, handing her a tablet. On the screen was a headline from one of the nation's biggest networks. Conservative conspiracy, JD Vance, and Karoline Leavitt spread dangerous misinformation. Caroline raised an eyebrow. "What now?" Mark scrolled down, showing clips from a recent radio interview where Karoline and JD Vance had discussed media bias and the deliberate omission of certain stories from mainstream coverage. The network had twisted their words, making it sound like they were spreading baseless conspiracy theories. "They're calling us conspiracy theorists for pointing out media manipulation?" Caroline asked incredulously. Mark nodded. "It's all over the place. They're pushing the narrative that you and JD are undermining public trust by attacking the press." Just as Caroline was about to respond, her phone buzzed again. This time it was JD Vance himself. "Caroline, you seeing this garbage?" JD's voice was low and calm, but Caroline could sense the frustration. "Yeah, they're spinning our words like we're the problem," Caroline replied. JD sighed. "They're scared. We hit a nerve when we called them out on covering up real stories. We can't just let them smear us." Caroline agreed. "We need to fight back. But how?" There was a pause on the line, and then JD's voice came through, more determined. "We go on their turf. Let's confront them live on air. Call them out where they can't edit or twist our words." Caroline's eyes lit up. "You really think they'll let us do that?" JD chuckled. "They're so convinced they're right, they probably think we'll crumble on camera. Let's prove them wrong." Later that afternoon, Caroline's phone buzzed again. This time it was an invitation from the very network that had smeared them. "Join us live tomorrow evening to address your recent controversial comments about media bias." Mark looked at the message and raised an eyebrow. "They actually invited you?" Caroline smirked. "They think they can ambush us, but they don't realize we're ready." She quickly called JD. "They took the bait. We're going live tomorrow night." JD's voice was resolute. "Good. Let's expose them in their own studio." The next evening, Karoline and JD arrived at the studio together. The building was bustling with producers, camera crews, and reporters milling about. A junior producer approached them, clipboard in hand. "Ms. Leavitt, Mr. Vance, right this way. You'll be live in 15 minutes. They were led into a green room where a makeup artist fussed over their appearances. JD leaned back in his chair. "They're definitely setting a trap. You ready?" Caroline met his gaze in the mirror. "I've never been more ready. They think they can intimidate us. Let's flip the script." Minutes later, they were ushered into the studio. The host, Dana Reynolds, greeted them with a broad, forced smile. She was known for her sharp interviews and relentless questioning, especially when it came to conservative guests. As the cameras began rolling, Dana addressed the audience with her usual commanding tone. "Tonight, we're joined by two controversial figures in the conservative movement, Karoline Leavitt and Senator JD Vance. Recently, they made statements accusing the mainstream media of deliberately hiding stories from the public. Tonight, we'll discuss those accusations and the impact of spreading misinformation." Karoline and JD exchanged a quick glance, knowing the setup was designed to make them look foolish. Dana turned to JD first. "Senator Vance, you claimed that mainstream media actively covers up stories that don't fit their narrative. Can you provide any proof of that?" JD didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. Just last week, there was a major leak involving government officials involved in a corruption scandal, but it barely got any coverage. Meanwhile, they spent hours dissecting trivial celebrity gossip. Why is that?" Dana raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Maybe because the leak was unverified. We can't just broadcast unproven allegations." Karoline jumped in. "That's exactly the problem, Dana. When a story implicates conservative figures, your network runs with it immediately, whether it's verified or not. But when it involves your preferred politicians or narratives, it's suddenly too risky to air." Dana shot back. "We have editorial standards." JD cut in, his voice firm but calm. "Then why did your network report on the unverified Steele dossier like it was gospel truth? Why does selective skepticism only apply when it's inconvenient for your narrative?" Dana's composure faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. We report based on credible sources. Karoline leaned forward. No, you report based on your agenda. When the Hunter Biden laptop story broke, your network dismissed it as Russian disinformation. Now even liberal outlets admit it was real. Where was your credible sourcing then? The audience murmured, sensing the shift in power. Dana forced a smile. You can't compare baseless conspiracy theories to verified news. JD smirked. Your network doesn't verify, it speculates. And when the truth comes out later, you move on without accountability. Dana seemed momentarily at a loss, then redirected. But why undermine public trust in the media? Doesn't that damage democracy? Karoline didn't miss a beat. You damage democracy by manipulating information. The media's job is to inform, not to filter the truth through a partisan lens. We're not undermining trust. We're exposing bias. There's a difference. Dana hesitated, but before she could speak, JD added, Americans are tired of being lied to. They deserve to hear the truth, even when it's inconvenient for you. The tension was thick, and the audience was noticeably more subdued. Dana, sensing her grip on the interview slipping, wrapped up quickly. Well, that's all the time we have for tonight. Thank you, Karoline Leavitt and Senator JD Vance, for joining us. As the cameras cut, Dana's professional mask dropped. You two just made a lot of enemies. Karoline smiled. Good. We're not here to make friends. We're here to tell the truth. Social media exploded within minutes. Clips of the interview went viral, especially the moment when Karoline called out the double standard in reporting. Conservative pundits praised the duo for standing firm, while liberal commentators criticized the network for giving them a platform. Later that night, JD texted Karoline, We didn't just survive that, we owned it. Well done. Karoline replied, They tried to ambush us and ended up exposing themselves. Couldn't have done it without you. The next morning, a new headline emerged. Leavitt and Vance, the conservative duo who challenged media bias live on air. The network's attempt to corner them had backfired spectacularly. Karoline knew the fight wasn't over, but for now they had shown the country that truth could still prevail, even when the odds were stacked against them. The morning after the explosive live interview, Karoline woke up to a flood of notifications. Social media was ablaze with reactions, and her inbox was packed with messages of support and criticism. Mark, her communications director, had already started compiling key responses. He greeted her with a look that was both excited and cautious. You need to see this, he said, holding up his tablet. On the screen was a trending hashtag #MediaLiesExposed. Clips of Karoline and JD challenging the host's double standards were spreading like wildfire. Conservative pundits were praising them for finally calling out the bias directly, while mainstream outlets were doubling down, accusing them of being reckless and spreading misinformation. JD Vance called soon after. Well, we sure stirred the pot, he said with a chuckle. Karoline grinned. They didn't expect us to hit back like that, but we've got a problem. The network is now running segments calling us irresponsible and claiming we're pushing dangerous narratives. JD's tone became more serious. Typical. They try to silence anyone who challenges their control. But we can't let them twist this. Let's go on the offensive. Our own live stream, addressing the whole thing unfiltered. Karoline nodded. I like it. No editing, no bias, just the truth. JD agreed. Let's set it up for tonight. We'll go live on multiple platforms. I'll coordinate with my team. You get yours ready. That evening, Karoline and JD sat side by side in a simple, unpretentious setting. A plain room with an American flag draped in the background. The cameras were set up, and the live stream began with a countdown. Thousands tuned in within minutes. JD kicked off the conversation. Thanks for joining us tonight. If you watched the interview yesterday, you know we didn't hold back. But what's been happening since is an all-out media assault, painting us as conspiracy theorists for simply telling the truth. Karoline took over. What they're doing is gaslighting the American people. We pointed out specific instances where the media twisted stories or buried inconvenient truths. Instead of addressing our points, they've chosen to attack us personally. JD nodded. That's what they do when they're scared. They don't want anyone questioning their monopoly on information. But here's the thing. We're not backing down. The comments section was scrolling fast, filled with messages of support. Finally, someone calling out the media. JD and Karoline, keep speaking the truth. Don't let them silence you. Karoline glanced at the chat, a fire igniting in her eyes. We need to talk about what they're doing to public discourse. They create narratives and then punish anyone who challenges them. It's not just dishonest, it's dangerous. When media acts as gatekeepers, democracy suffers. JD leaned forward, his voice resolute. We're not saying all media is corrupt, but when powerful networks selectively decide what stories are worthy based on their political agendas, it becomes propaganda. We're not going to stand by while they silence conservative voices. Karoline added, it's not just about us. It's about every American who's been called a conspiracy theorist just for asking questions. We're being vilified for wanting transparency. That should concern everyone, regardless of politics. The live chat was flooded with applause emojis and American flags. The energy was palpable even through the screen. The next morning, the mainstream networks didn't waste time retaliating. One anchor sneered, Leavitt and Vance are doubling down on their conspiracy rhetoric, now accusing the entire media landscape of being biased. This kind of rhetoric only fuels distrust in credible journalism. Karoline shook her head as she watched the segment. They're so predictable. JD sent her a text. Time to drop the receipts. Let's show them they're the ones misleading people. That afternoon, they released a compilation video of mainstream networks reporting on the Hunter Biden laptop story, showing how many of them called it Russian disinformation without any evidence. The video contrasted those reports with recent admissions that the laptop was, in fact, authentic. The compilation ended with Karoline's voice. When the truth finally comes out, these networks never apologize. They just move on, pretending they didn't smear the truth tellers. That's not journalism, that's damage control. It wasn't long before the video trended on social media. Independent journalists started covering the story, analyzing how the mainstream media had failed its duty to inform accurately. Even some moderate commentators began questioning why major networks had dismissed the laptop story so readily. A few days later, Karoline was invited onto a popular conservative podcast. The host greeted her with enthusiasm. Karoline, you and JD Vance just flipped the media narrative on its head. How do you feel about the backlash? Karoline smiled. Honestly, it's proof that we struck a nerve. They didn't expect anyone to challenge their authority live on air. They're used to controlling the narrative. We broke that illusion. The host nodded. Do you think this will change how Americans view mainstream media? Karoline's tone was firm. It already is. People are realizing that media giants aren't as objective as they claim to be. They're starting to ask why some stories get buried while others are amplified. That's the real victory here, awakening the public to think critically. The ripple effect was undeniable. Independent media and grassroots organizations began to echo Karoline and JD's points. Conservative commentators praised them for not just defending themselves, but holding the media accountable. The mainstream outlets, meanwhile, seemed to pull back from direct attacks, realizing that their aggressive stance had backfired. An op-ed in a major newspaper even admitted, perhaps the media needs to examine its own biases rather than immediately dismissing criticism. JD called Karoline that evening. Looks like we didn't just survive, we turned the tables. Karoline couldn't help but smile. They thought they could break us. Turns out we broke their control instead. JD laughed. You're right, and we're just getting started. The movement that began as a defense against false accusations had grown into a broader conversation about media integrity. Karoline and JD knew there would be more battles ahead, but now they had the momentum. More importantly, they had shown America that challenging the narrative wasn't just possible, it was necessary. And as the sun set on a victorious week, they both knew this was only the beginning of holding the media accountable, one truth at a time.